All right. Hey, good morning. Welcome to Field Trip Fridays. My name is Brad Bertelli, the curator here at the Keys History and Discovery Center, and today at the Plantation Key School. I know we've talked a lot about some of the early schools in the Florida Keys, one-room wooden structures with no air conditioning and no mosquito control. We visited last week the Tavernier School, which was built in 1938, much improved over the early two-room coral rock schools, the one-room wooden schools with air conditioning and reinforced walls. And today we are at the Plantation Key School, which stands in stark contrast to those early schools. This is a state-of-the-art school, and the reason that we came here is that back in 2015, before this structure was built, Lisa Taylor, the principal of Florida Keys, Plantation Key School, contacted the Discovery Center and asked us for some input for some of the exhibits that they applied to the wall space here at the school. So today we're going to take a little look at one of the things we're really proud of at the Keys History and Discovery Center that we were able to contribute to the community and to Plantation Key School. Now, if you have any questions, Jill is on the phone and can signal me and tell me what they are. Otherwise, I'll get back to you later on in the day and answer any questions that you have. But let's take a little walk. Our contribution to this really amazing school was really kind of the inspiration behind this massive graphic on the wall and talking about the history of the Florida Keys and some key components of that history. And we're starting here at the bottom at Key West and kind of working our way north to Key Largo. And while this really cool satellite image shows some great detail of the island chain, with the name, you see the highway, you can see the name of the islands. And then below those, we have these circular components that talk about specific pieces of history and some kind of important parts of the Florida Keys. We're talking about, a strategic Key West with the arrival of the Navy, Henry Flagler's Oversea Railroad, which really changed how the Florida Keys were viewed and how they were experienced, really brought consistency to the island chain. Before that, there was nothing but boats, which were subject to hurricanes and weather and tides. And the train really gave some reliability and really improved the life on the Florida Keys. Of course, wrecking, we've talked about wrecking a great deal. The first real big boom business, Key West, was built on the back of the wrecking industry, and it really made Key West the richest city per capita in the state and the country at one point. Little Palm Island here, that is a private island resort. Way too expensive for my meager means, but a great place, but a beautiful place to visit. We have Big Pine Key next on the list. That's the second largest of the Florida Keys. The largest, of course, being Key Largo. And Big Pine, most notably, for its key deer, these subspecies of the white-tailed deer, which are such an important aspect of our ecology and such a great iconic creature associated with the islands. And of course, we have to have the 7 Mile Bridge, an amazing physical construct during construction of the Oversea Railroad, and now a really interesting and picturesque drive across these days. We have Sombrero Key Lighthouse is the next one on the list, and that lighthouse is visible from the 7 Mile Bridge. Now, it's called Sombrero Key Lighthouse, even though it's out on the reef line, because one of the early names for this was also called Dry Banks, because there is a low tide, and you can see that there's actual, there's a little spit of land out there. That ship you see in the distance there is the Louisiana, and that ship got stuck on the reef there, and they had to use dynamite to kind of blow out a path for the ship to be moved off of the reef. Next in the line, we have a little something about the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, that hurricane that pops up over and over and over in the history of the Florida Keys, as it was such a seminal event in the history of our island chain. That picture is of the railroad car after the 18-foot wall of water swept over Upper Matecumbe Key. And we're looking at this picture here, and you can see up here, this is where the railroad depot once was. And today, that's the site of the Islamorada Post Office. Now, this is interesting. We'll take a quick look at this. That's the Florida Keys Memorial, which was built in 1937 as a way of honoring all the victims of the hurricane. You know, as many as 500 people were killed, both veterans, World War I veterans who'd come to the island to build a series of bridges, but also you know, hundreds of lives of locals who died. Now, with all the Sahara dust that's blowing over right now, this is nothing unusual. I know it makes for spectacular sunsets, but this Sahara dust has been blowing over across the Atlantic Ocean and settling on the Florida Keys for thousands and thousands of years. And what you see, there's some red pigment here in the keystone. This is limestone that was quarried here on Winley Key, and then it was shipped off to Miami. It was cut, quarried, shipped to Miami, and kind of polished to make this decorative rock called keystone. And when you see these red patches in the limestone, that's, you know, that's Sahara dust that blew over hundreds and thousands of years ago. Now we're moving on to the next panel, which is my favorite island in the Florida Keys, the amazing Indian Key. That's an image of the model that we had built for the Keys History and Discovery Center. It's one thing to go out to the island and walk around and see the ruins and walk on the old road structures, but you really can't get an appreciation for how really developed and how spectacular and how advanced that little community was. It's in a little 11-acre island, doesn't look like a whole lot today, but it really was, that was the most important city not called Key West in the Florida Keys for quite some time. Now next on the list we have the 1733 Treasure Fleet, kind of an you know, a little something about that fleet. For hundreds of years, the ships, these Spanish galleons and merchant ships would sail between the Old World and the New World, coming back from Mexico along through the Florida Straits on the way home to Spain. Often they were subject to hurricanes and adverse weather. And the 1733 fleet on Friday the 13th, September 13th, on Friday, they were engulfed by a hurricane, and many of the ships were lost during the hurricane. And these markings here on this map kind of show a lot of these shipwrecks. And these are the ships that were really rediscovered about 1938 by Art McKee, who is known as the father of modern treasure hunting. And a lot of the anchors, a lot of the artifacts that you see lining the overseas highway came, and the cannons and things came from these wrecks. It happened here in the Upper Keys, just offshore of Plantation Key and Key Largo and Upper Matecumbe, Lower Matecumbe. Now the next island, the next panel in the chain in the link here is Winley Key Fossil Reef Geological State Park, which is on Winley Key. But you can see these. This is an old quarry that was used during construction of Henry Flagler's Railroad, during construction of the Overseas Highway, during construction of the 1935-36 bridge projects. And this is where Keystone comes from. It's one thing to say that the Florida Keys were built on an ancient coral reef. Another thing altogether to go to this park, which is another amazing example of a Florida state park. And you can see these exposed quarry walls. And then you can also see just the very limited amount of topsoil that is on, that are on the Florida Keys, which makes gardening such a difficult process. And these big slabs of a limestone substrate are what were also used to create and are used to create that beautiful decorative rock called keystone. Now, next in the line, we're going to go to just kind of representation of the early settlements of the Florida Keys the Aboriginal people who lived here thousands of years ago and carved out their life. Here on Plantation Key, there were several Indian mounds, Indian middens. In fact, across the road from where Jill lives is in Plantation Key Colony, in the boat ramp, the owner's park there was the site of one of these early Indian mounds that the locals growing up here, the kids have talked to me who are adults now, but as children back in the 60s and 70s, they would go to these mounds and kind of pick out and pilfer them and take pieces of shells, conch shells and whelk shells and such. Now the next in line we have in Key Largo, this is the Tavernier School that was built in about 1936, 1937, and this is where we visited last week, where and this was built in response to the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. And this building was built to be hurricane proof. It has really thick concrete walls that are reinforced with rebar. There is an internal cistern, 2-cell cistern in there to collect rainwater. And these buildings, there's 2 of them that were built. There was this Tavernier School and also the Matacumbe Grammar School that is today home to the Alamorada Library. And these buildings were built as schools, yes, but also as storm structures, as a safe place for the community members to gather during these magnificent, these devastating hurricanes. And of course, one of the things that is, Key Largo and the Florida Keys are so famous for are the coral reefs. And we have our next panel there, which is kind of talks a little bit about John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park. If you come to the Florida Keys and to Key Largo, everyone's heard of Pennekamp. This is where kind of where snorkeling and diving really began to be commercialized, and that's kind of been the home of diving and snorkeling for a lot of the early history of in the 70s and early 80s. There's even a great comic with Dennis the Menace, where Dennis the Menace visits the Coral Reef State Park, and Dennis and his family to go on the glass bottom boat ride and see the fish, and that's one of my favorite things in my personal collection is that particular comic book. And the last thing we have, of course, is the Overseas Highway, the conduit that really began to change and bring tourism to the Florida Keys. We've talked a lot about the Overseas Highway. There's a lot to talk about. There's been, several incarnations of the highway. This picture shows more about the first version of the highway, built in 1927, opened to the public in 1928. And this is the first highway that links the mainland to Key West. Now, this early version of the highway went all the way to Lower Matacumbe Key, and at Lower Matacumbe Key, these cars would have to go onto an automobile ferry, and then take a 4-hour ride down to No Name Key, where the car would disembark and then travel the rest of the way to Key West. Now, if you're going to Long Key Fishing Camp, which this car is doing, there was no road to Long Key Fishing Camp. So often, what these cars would do is technical difficulty. There we go. So often what these cars would do would just drive over the railroad tracks. The trains were scheduled, so there was no threat of being run off the railroads. They knew the schedule of the train, and these cars would drive from Miami to Lower Matacumbe Key, and from Lower Matacumbe Key, this is, I believe, Channel 5 bridge, and then go over the Channel 5 bridge to the Long Key Fishing Camp, where they would stay and enjoy themselves and relax. So this is really a kind of a cool contribution. We were able to invited and able to help with this amazing school. I know things have changed certainly. Oh look, they have the Plantation Key School is the home of the Panthers. So I didn't notice that before, but right there on Plantation Key, we see that Panther footprint, and that's the home of the school here where we are today. All right, so I want to thank you for, let's come back. All right, so I want to thank you for joining us again for our Field Trip Fridays. We are going to not be here next Friday for the holiday weekend. What?
Today's our last one.
Oh, our last one, our last Field Trip Friday? Oh, okay, well, this is going to be our last Field Trip Fridays. But we're still going to be back on Tuesday morning to explore the Keys History and Discovery Center, do a little bit more exploration of some of our exhibits there. And in the meantime, you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you Tuesday. And Wednesday, I believe we have a Cocktails with the Curator lined up. No, we don't. Nope. All right, things are changing. So we'll see you Tuesday morning, and have a great weekend. And we look forward to seeing everybody back here at in the Florida Keys. Thank you so much.